And just what, exactly, is a civilian librarian doing in the Fleet Command Nexus during the largest wargame simulation in naval history? The voice dripped with the kind of condescending authority that only a young officer, barely a year out of the academy and drunk on his own sudden importance, could muster. Lieutenant Decker, his jaw set in a perfect granite square, and his uniform, so crisp it seemed to have been forged rather than starched, stood with his arms crossed, blocking the entrance. The entire command deck, a cavernous amphitheater of glowing holographic displays and humming server racks, fell into a hushed stillness. Dozens of operators, analysts, and senior officers turned from their consoles, their faces a mixture of curiosity and nervous anticipation. Before Decker stood a woman who was his complete antithesis. She appeared to be in her late 50s, her hair a simple, practical gray bun, her face etched with lines that spoke of quiet observation rather than dramatic conflict. She wore simple gray slacks and a worn cardigan over a plain blouse, clutching a soft, unassuming canvas tote bag. She was the picture of gentle anonymity, a ghost of beige and gray in a world of sharp navy blue and gleaming gold. The crowd, sensing the imminent, ritualistic humiliation of an outsider, began to murmur. A few of the younger ensigns, eager to align themselves with Decker's perceived authority, snickered audibly. The woman said nothing. She didn't flinch, didn't stammer, didn't offer a defense. Her gaze remained calm, her posture relaxed. She simply stood there, a silent, unmovable stone in the path of a blustering river. This unnerving placidity only seemed to enrage Decker further. He saw it not as confidence, but as the insolence of a bureaucratic nobody who had wandered into a realm of giants. "I asked you a question, ma'am," he snapped, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "This is the command and control hub for Operation Aegis Fury. We are actively simulating the defense of the entire Pacific Fleet from a peer-state cyber and kinetic assault. Every person in this room is a hand-picked, top-tier operator. You, on the other hand, look like you got lost on your way to a book club." He gestured dismissively at her bag. "What's in there? Knitting? A thermos of tea? Your security clearance is level 0. You have no authorization. So for the last time, who are you and what are you doing here?" Still, she remained silent. Her eyes, a pale and startlingly intelligent blue, simply watched him, not with defiance, but with a kind of detached, analytical patience, as if she were observing a new and interesting species of insect. This was the final straw. It was one thing to be an intruder. It was another to so completely and silently refuse to acknowledge his power. But as Decker reached for her bag, a flicker of movement caught his eye from the main observation deck above. Admiral Thorne, the 5-star architect of the entire exercise, paused his conversation and looked down, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, Decker saw the Admiral's eyes weren't on him, but on the woman and on the specific, peculiar way she held her ground. Not braced for a fight, but perfectly balanced, as if she were the very center of gravity in the room. Decker, however, was too committed to his course of action to heed the subtle warning. If you believe that true strength is found not in the volume of the voice, but in the weight of one's actions, type competence in the comments below. "This is not a negotiation," Lieutenant Decker declared, his voice rising to fill the now deafening silence of the Fleet Command Nexus. He felt the eyes of his subordinates on him, the weight of expectation from the senior officers who, by their silence, had given him tacit permission to enforce the sanctity of their domain. He was the gatekeeper, and this unassuming woman was the ultimate test of his vigilance. Her continued silence was a mockery of his rank, an affront to the rigid, hierarchical world he had sworn to uphold. He saw her not as a person, but as a symbol of the disorder he was meant to contain. He snatched the canvas tote bag from her hand. The fabric was soft, worn from years of use. It felt ridiculously light, absurdly mundane. The woman did not resist. Her hand simply opened, releasing the bag without a fight, her arm returning to her side in a slow, deliberate motion. She adjusted her cardigan slightly, a gesture so normal, so utterly out of place in the high-stakes tension of the room, that it was almost surreal. It was the gesture of someone waiting for a bus, not someone being publicly accosted in the nerve center of the United States Navy. "Let's see what state secrets you're smuggling, shall we?" Decker said with a sneer, turning to the nearest empty console table. With a dramatic flourish, he upended the bag. The contents tumbled out onto the polished black surface, scattering with a series of soft, anticlimactic thuds. The expected reaction, a gasp of discovery or the clatter of some forbidden device, never came. Instead, the operators and officers leaned in, their faces shifting from tension to pure, unadulterated confusion. A well-worn paperback copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. A small, neatly wrapped sandwich. A gleaming set of silver knitting needles attached to a half-finished blue scarf. A stainless steel thermos that, when it rolled, gurgled with the sound of liquid. And a simple, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with elegant, handwritten script that was too far away to read. The crowd was silent, but for a different reason now. This wasn't a spy. This wasn't a threat. This was, as Decker had so loudly proclaimed, someone's grandmother. The humiliation was complete, but it was a strange, hollow victory. Decker had proven his point, but the point itself now felt small and mean-spirited. He had used a cannon to shoot a moth. He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim the authority that was rapidly dissolving into awkwardness. "As I suspected," he announced, gesturing to the pathetic collection of items. "Completely unauthorized. A security risk of the highest order. I'm having you escorted from the facility and filing a full report." He looked back at the woman, expecting to see tears, fear, or at least a flicker of shame. He saw none of it. Her expression had not changed. Her pale blue eyes were still fixed on him, her calm unwavering. It was in that moment that a cold dread, formless and unsettling, began to prickle at the back of Decker's neck. Her lack of reaction was no longer passive. It felt profound. It felt like the deep, ancient silence of an ocean trench, a quiet that concealed an immensity of pressure and power he could not possibly comprehend. He had made a terrible, fundamental miscalculation, and the quiet librarian standing before him knew it, and had known it all along. The first indication of the crisis was not a sound, but a color. A single bead of ruby-red light blinked to life on the main holographic map of the Pacific Theater. Then another, and another. Within seconds, a crimson tide washed over the serene blue of the display, spreading like a virus through the network. Icons representing carrier strike groups, submarines, and Aegis cruisers flickered and died, vanishing from the board as if they had never existed. A low, discordant alarm began to pulse through the nexus, a sound designed by psychologists to induce maximum anxiety. "What is that?" A commander barked from the upper tier. "Report." An operator, a young ensign with sweat already beading on his forehead, frantically tapped at his console. "Sir, we're losing data links to the fleet. Comms are down across the board. It's a total network failure." The room, once a model of disciplined order, erupted into controlled chaos. Voices overlapped, shouting acronyms and demanding status updates. Decker, his public confrontation with the old woman completely forgotten, spun around, his face pale. This wasn't part of the simulation. The war game was designed to be challenging, to push their systems to the brink, but not to break them entirely. This was something else. This was an intrusion, a real one. "Get the network chief on the line," Decker yelled, his voice tight with rising panic. "Isolate the corrupted nodes. Activate firewall protocols. Now." But his orders were useless, echoing into a void of technological collapse. The operators were locked out. Their screens were filled with cascading lines of nonsensical code, a digital waterfall of gibberish. The system wasn't just failing, it was actively resisting their attempts to fix it. They were passengers in their own ship, watching it sink. Admiral Thorne's voice cut through the noise, calm and cold as deep space. "Report, Commander. Is this part of the simulation's inject, or are we under genuine attack?" The sector commander's reply was grim. We don't know, Admiral. The system is unresponsive. It's a dead stick scenario. We have no control. The air in the room grew thick with the unspoken fear. An entire fleet, the most advanced naval force on the planet, was now sailing blind, deaf, and defenseless. In that maelstrom of fear and confusion, a single point of stillness emerged. The woman in the gray cardigan moved. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She walked with a slow, deliberate grace toward an auxiliary console at the far end of the room, one that had been powered down and marked for diagnostics. Her path took her past the table where the contents of her life lay scattered. She paused for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering over the knitting needles, before continuing on. She slid into the operator's chair, her movements economical and fluid. Her fingers, which moments before looked suited only for turning the pages of a book, rested on the keyboard. They were long and elegant, and they held a strange, latent stillness, like a pianist's hands before the first note of a concerto. She ignored the main power button and instead reached under the console, her fingers finding a small, unmarked panel. With a faint click, she activated the machine's direct hardware interface, bypassing the compromised operating system entirely. A single Star Command prompt blinked to life on the dark screen, a tiny oasis of order in a sea of digital chaos. The room was a symphony of panic, a cacophony of shouted orders and the relentless, unnerving blare of the alarm. But around the auxiliary console, a pocket of absolute silence began to form. The woman, Elara Vance, did not look at the chaos engulfing the fleet command nexus. She did not look at the frantic officers or the uselessly flashing screens. Her entire world had shrunk to the small, dark monitor in front of her, to the single, blinking cursor that was her only way in. Her hands, which Decker had dismissed as frail and old, moved over the keyboard. And it was not typing. It was a performance. Her fingers danced, a blur of motion that seemed too fast for the human eye to follow. There was no hesitation, no pause to think. She was not recalling information. She was channeling it. Long, impossibly complex strings of code flowed from her fingertips onto the screen, not in the clumsy, blocky text of a standard programmer, but in a fluid, elegant script that seemed to have a life of its own. She wasn't just entering commands. She was having a conversation with the machine at its most fundamental level. The young ensign at the next station, who had given up on his own locked console, watched her, his mouth agape. He was a cybernetics prodigy, the best coder in his class at Annapolis, and he couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. She was using protocols he had only read about in classified textbooks, weaving together system languages that were supposed to be incompatible, building bridges and firewalls on the fly from raw code. It was like watching someone construct a skyscraper with their bare hands in the middle of a hurricane and do it with the placid expression of someone arranging flowers. A commander, noticing the ensign's stunned silence, strode over. "What is she doing?" he demanded. The ensign couldn't tear his eyes from her screen. "Sir, I don't know. It's not just a counter-hack. She's not defending. She's hunting." On the main holographic display, something new appeared. Amidst the sea of red, a single thread of brilliant, electric blue began to weave its way through the dead network. It was her. It was the digital ghost of her commands, moving at impossible speeds through layers of corrupted data and malicious kill switches. The hostile code, the red tide, reacted to her presence. It swarmed, trying to cut her off, to isolate and delete her. But her blue thread was too fast, too agile. It dodged, it feinted, it laid traps of its own. She wasn't just patching holes. She was mapping the enemy's entire attack structure, turning their own weapons against them. Lieutenant Decker, his face ashen, stood frozen in the center of the room. The sandwich, the knitting needles, the book, they all seemed like artifacts from another reality. He was watching a quiet librarian dismantle a nation-state-level cyberweapon as if it were a mildly challenging crossword puzzle. The alarm, which had been a constant, pulsing shriek, suddenly stuttered. It went silent. One by one, the blue icons of the fleet began to reappear on the main display. First, the carrier Nimitz, then its Aegis escorts, then the deep-diving submarines. They flickered back to life, their data streams clean, stable, and shielded by a new layer of encryption so complex, so elegant, that it was a work of art. In less than 3 minutes, the entire Pacific Fleet was back online. The red tide had vanished, completely purged from the system. The room was plunged into a profound, echoing silence. Every single person, from the lowest-ranking operator to the sector commanders, was staring at the old woman in the gray cardigan, who had just single-handedly fought and won a war no one else even knew how to begin. She typed one final command. On every screen in the Nexus, a single line of text appeared. System secure. Threat neutralized. Have a nice day, then. She gently pushed the keyboard away, her work complete. Admiral Thorne moved with a purpose that parted the sea of stunned officers. His face, usually a mask of stoic command, was etched with a mixture of profound relief and something else, a deep, resonant respect. He didn't address the commanders or demand a report from the cybernetics team. He walked directly to the auxiliary console, where the woman sat, still and silent. Her calm composure a stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled aftermath of the crisis. He stopped beside her, not looking down at her as a superior, but standing next to her as an equal. Lieutenant Decker, jolted from his stupor, saw his chance to reclaim some semblance of control. He hurried over, his voice still shaky. "Admiral, this woman, we have her contained. She bypassed security, and I was in the process of removing her when the attack." His words trailed off under the weight of Thorne's gaze, which was as cold and heavy as a block of ice. "Contained her, Lieutenant?" Thorne's voice was dangerously quiet. "You believe you contained her?" Thorne looked from Decker's pale, confused face to the woman, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "You have no idea who you're talking to, do you, son?" He gestured to a nearby master-at-arms. "Bring me your bag." Not the contents on the table. The bag itself. The guard, looking utterly bewildered, gathered the scattered items, the book, the knitting, the thermos, and placed them back into the canvas tote. He handed it to the Admiral with the reverence one might afford a holy relic. Thorne took the bag and set it gently on the console next to the woman. He did not open it. He simply looked at Decker, his eyes burning with an intensity that made the young lieutenant feel like he was shrinking. "In your rush to judgment, Lieutenant," Thorne said, his voice now carrying across the silent room, "in your haste to enforce the letter of the law while ignoring its spirit, you failed to do the one thing a good officer must always do. You failed to observe. You saw what you expected to see. An old woman, a civilian, a threat to your perfect order." Thorne reached into the bag, his hand bypassing the everyday items on top. His fingers found a small, hidden compartment in the lining, secured by a nearly invisible zipper. With a soft pull, he opened it. His movements were slow, deliberate, ensuring everyone in the Nexus could see. He reached inside and withdrew a single, perfectly folded object. He let it unfold under its own weight. It was a uniform, a dress-white service coat, made of a pristine, high-grade fabric that seemed to absorb the light of the room. It was stark, immaculate, and utterly out of place. But it was the insignia that drew a collective, audible gasp from every person in the chamber. On the shoulders were not the stripes of a captain or the single star of a rear admiral. There were 5 silver stars, arranged in a pentagonal cluster, gleaming under the tactical lighting. The rank of a fleet admiral. And on the sleeve, above the gold braid, was a patch that most in the room had only ever read about in classified histories, a symbol of a command so secret it was practically a myth, a silver ghost haunting a field of blackest night. The insignia of the legendary Task Force Chimera, the Navy's clandestine ghost fleet. A wave of disbelief, followed by dawning, horrified understanding, washed over the command nexus. The uniform was not a costume. The rank was not a joke. The silence in the room was no longer just the absence of noise. It was a vacuum, filled with the immense, crushing weight of a revealed truth. The knitting needles, the worn copy of Marcus Aurelius, the half-eaten sandwich, These were not the belongings of a simple librarian. They were the camouflage of a predator, the unassuming plumage of an eagle who had chosen to walk amongst pigeons. Lieutenant Decker stared at the 5 stars, each one a burning indictment of his arrogance. His entire career, his understanding of the world, his sense of his own importance, it all collapsed in that single, silent moment. He had not just insulted a civilian. He had publicly humiliated a 5-star admiral. He had tried to eject a living legend from her own domain. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. He wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Admiral Thorne let the moment hang in the air, allowing the full impact of the revelation to settle on every person in the room. He then carefully folded the uniform and placed it back on the console. He turned his full attention to the woman, his posture shifting from one of command to one of profound deference. He stood straight, brought his heels together with a sharp click, and rendered the crispest, most formal salute of his long and storied career. "Admiral Vance," he said, his voice clear and resonant, filled with a respect that bordered on reverence. "My apologies for the reception. It seems some of our junior officers value protocol over perception." Elara Vance finally looked up at him, her pale blue eyes holding his. She returned the salute, not with a military snap, but with a slight, almost imperceptible nod of her head. It was an acknowledgement between peers, an exchange that transcended the need for formal ceremony. "It's quite all right, Christopher," she said, and her voice was the biggest shock of all. It was not the frail, reedy voice of an old woman. It was calm, clear, and carried an undercurrent of absolute authority, the voice of someone who had given orders that decided the fates of nations. A system's integrity is only as strong as its gatekeepers. The lieutenant was enthusiastic in his duties. The word enthusiastic was delivered with such a neutral, dispassionate tone that it was more damning than any insult could ever be. Thorne turned his gaze back to the room, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces. "For those of you who are unfamiliar," he began, his voice taking on the quality of a lecturer revealing a fundamental law of the universe. "You are in the presence of Fleet Admiral Elara Vance, call sign Oracle. She was the chief architect of the entire global command and control network you are currently using. She wrote the base code for the Aegis combat system when she was a junior officer half a century ago. She founded the Navy's Cyber Warfare Division and served as the first commander of Task Force Chimera for 20 years. The reason her security clearance didn't register is because she is the security clearance. Her biometrics are the system's master key." He paused, letting the litany of impossible achievements sink in. "Admiral Vance retired 5 years ago. Officially. She is here today, at my personal request, to observe Aegis Fury and provide an assessment of our vulnerabilities. It would seem," he added with a dry, ironic edge, "her assessment is already complete." He looked directly at Decker, his eyes devoid of pity. "You didn't just try to remove a fleet admiral, Lieutenant. You tried to remove the ghost in the machine." The story of what happened in the Fleet Command Nexus during Aegis Fury spread not like wildfire, but like a ghost. It moved silently through secure channels, in hushed conversations in the mess halls, and in encrypted messages between senior officers. It wasn't an official report. It was a legend, passed down with a sense of awe and cautionary reverence. The tale of the librarian admiral became an immediate and indelible part of the Naval War College's institutional folklore. Junior officers spoke of how Lieutenant Decker, in his moment of supreme arrogance, had dumped out her bag, revealing nothing but knitting needles and a book, only for her to then single-handedly save the entire Pacific Fleet from a ghost attack no one else could see. They whispered about the moment Admiral Thorne unveiled her 5-star uniform, a relic from a shadow world of command they could barely imagine. The auxiliary console she had used was cordoned off, not by official order, but by an unspoken consensus of respect. Technicians who came to service it found a small, hand-knitted blue swatch, the beginning of a scarf, tucked neatly beside the monitor. It was left untouched. Unofficially, the console became known as the Oracle Station, and it became a point of pilgrimage for young cyber warfare cadets, a silent monument to the idea that true mastery was quiet, unassuming, and devastatingly effective. Lieutenant Decker was not discharged. Admiral Vance, in a brief, private conversation with Thorne, had requested he not be. "Punishment is a blunt instrument," she had reportedly said. "Education is a scalpel. He has the potential to be a fine officer. Once he learns to see the person behind the uniform, or lack thereof." Decker was instead reassigned. He was sent to the archives, the sprawling, dusty basement of the War College Library, where he was tasked with digitizing the service records of retired officers from the pre-digital age. For 6 months, he spent 10 hours a day, surrounded by the quiet, paper histories of men and women whose incredible careers were summarized in faded ink and yellowed photographs. He read tales of quiet heroism, of unsung competence, of leaders who had guided the Navy through its darkest hours without fanfare or recognition. He saw in those files hundreds of Alara Vance Cess. His arrogance was burned away in that quiet, dusty room, replaced by a profound and lasting humility. He began to understand that the uniform he wore with such pride was not a suit of armor that made him important, but a cloak of responsibility he had yet to truly earn. The most profound change, however, was in the institution itself. The story forced a reckoning. Training modules were redesigned. Cadets were now taught to look for threats not just from the outside, but from the inside, from their own assumptions, their own prejudices. The Oracle Protocol became a standard simulation, a scenario where the solution came not from the most decorated officer or the loudest voice, but from the most unexpected quarter. It trained them to look for competence in all its forms, to value the quiet professional as much as the decorated warrior. The ripple effects of Admiral Vance's 3 minutes at the Oracle Station continued to expand, subtly but irrevocably altering the culture of the Naval War College and beyond. Her intervention had been a scalpel, as she had intended, excising a tumor of institutional arrogance with surgical precision. The legend of her quiet competence became a foundational myth for a new generation of officers. It was a story told to plebes on their first day at Annapolis and to seasoned commanders at the helm of billion-dollar warships. It served as a constant reminder that the greatest strength often carries the softest voice and that assumptions are the most dangerous enemy a leader could face. Lieutenant Decker, having completed his penance in the archives, returned to active duty a changed man. The brittle swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, observant confidence. He listened more than he spoke. He judged his subordinates on their actions, not their appearances or their pedigrees. He excelled, his career taking a new and unexpected trajectory. He became a specialist in threat assessment, renowned for his uncanny ability to see the hidden danger, to spot the anomaly that everyone else missed. He had learned, in the most humiliating way possible, to never again mistake the surface for the substance. He never spoke of the incident in the Nexus directly, but in his lectures to junior officers, he would often pause and look out at the sea of young, eager faces. "Respect," he would tell them, his voice steady and calm, "is not something you demand with your rank. It is something you earn with your character. Look for the quiet ones. Look for the person in the room who isn't talking, but watching. They are the ones who truly understand the battle space." Admiral Vance, true to her nature, had vanished back into the quiet anonymity from which she had emerged. She answered no official inquiries, accepted no medals, and attended no ceremonies in her honor. A few months after the incident, Admiral Thorne received a small package at his private residence. Inside was a completed, beautifully crafted dark blue scarf and a simple, handwritten note. It read, "Christopher, the chill in those command centers is worse than I remember. Stay warm." Alara, it was her only communication. She had returned to her life of quiet contemplation, of books and knitting, leaving behind a legacy not carved in stone, but woven into the very code of the institution she had saved. Her story became a bulwark against the encroachment of ego, a testament to the enduring power of demonstrated, silent competence over the loud, hollow drum of superficial arrogance. Her greatest victory was not in stopping the cyber attack, but in reminding an entire generation of warriors that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a quiet, well-ordered mind. Years later, a new class of cyber warfare cadets gathered in a state-of-the-art simulation center at the Naval War College. The room was a marvel of technology, a far cry from the nexus of Decker's time. Yet the principles taught remained the same. Their final exam was a legendary scenario, one whispered about in the dorms with a mixture of fear and reverence: the Oracle Protocol. The instructor, a seasoned and respected commander with a calm demeanor and observant eyes, initiated the program. The room's serene blue lighting immediately shifted to a jarring, hostile red. Alarms blared. The network collapsed. The cadets, despite their training, began to panic, their confident chatter devolving into frantic, ineffective commands. The instructor, Commander Decker, watched them, his expression unreadable. He let the chaos build for a full minute, allowing the weight of their failure to settle upon them. Then he silenced the alarm with a single keystroke. "You are failing," he said, his voice cutting through their panic. "You are failing because you are looking for the enemy on your screens. You are looking for a complex algorithm, a hostile state actor. You are looking for a ghost in the machine." He walked to the center of the room. "But the enemy in this scenario is not in the code. It is in you. It is in your arrogance. Your assumption that a problem of this magnitude must have a loud, complicated, and aggressive solution." He pointed to a quiet cadet in the back row, a young woman who hadn't been shouting orders, but had instead been methodically mapping the network's collapse on a simple datapad. "You," Decker said. "What have you observed?" The young woman looked up, startled. "Commander, the hostile code isn't attacking our defenses. It's redirecting them. It's using our own firewalls to choke the data streams. The more we fight it, the stronger it gets," Decker nodded slowly. "Precisely. The system is designed to defeat aggression. The solution, therefore, is not to fight. It is to yield, to open a single, clean channel and persuade the network that you're not a threat. You do not defeat the Oracle Protocol with a hammer. You solve it with a whisper." He looked around at the faces of the cadets, seeing his own youthful arrogance reflected back at him. "This simulation is named after Fleet Admiral Ilara Vance. Most of you have only read her name in your history texts. But I met her. I saw her stand in the heart of a storm like this one and achieve absolute victory with nothing but silence, observation, and a mastery so profound it looked like magic. She taught me, and now I am teaching you, the most important lesson you will ever learn. Competence is quiet. Ego es loud. Your job is not to be the storm. Your job is to be the eye of it." The legacy of Admiral Ilara Vance was not a statue in a courtyard or a ship named in her honor. Her true legacy was the quiet competence she had instilled in others, a living, breathing principle that propagated through the ranks long after she was gone. It was present in Commander Decker's patient mentorship, in a young cadet who learned to solve a problem by observing rather than shouting, and the thousands of officers who learned to value the silent professional. The story of the librarian Admiral became a parable, a teaching tool that was more powerful than any regulation or textbook. It reminded them that the most formidable people are often the ones you overlook, that strength is not about the noise you make, but about the impact you have. It championed the simple, revolutionary idea that respect is a currency earned through action, not demanded by rank. The Oracle station was eventually replaced with newer technology, but the small, hand-knitted blue swatch was carefully preserved and placed in a display case in the War College's main hall. Beneath it, a small brass plaque was installed. It did not list her name, her rank, or her accomplishments. It contained only the single line of text she had broadcast across the Nexus after winning her invisible war. System secure. Threat neutralized. Have a nice day. It was a perfect monument to her philosophy. Understated, slightly ironic, and utterly, profoundly effective. The story endures because it speaks to a fundamental truth, that in a world filled with noise, arrogance, and superficiality, the quiet, disciplined pursuit of excellence is its own reward and its own unstoppable force. True strength doesn't need to announce its presence. It is felt in the calm after the storm, in the order restored from chaos, in the legacy of competence that continues to move forward long after the professional has left the room. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a person's actions define their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.